Welcome everybody to this webinar where we'll be looking today at new updates for Overseer. My name is Steve McCauley, and on behalf of NZIPIM, I will be hosting the webinar. In this webinar, we've got Alastair Taylor, who will outline OverseerFM and what rural professionals need to know about the new software. Alastair will also be joined by Carly Sluice, who will be assisting him during this presentation. Before we get underway, I wish to note that this webinar will be in listen-only mode. If you are having trouble with the webinar, please lodge a question via the question button, which is on the right-hand side of the screen. Questions for our presenter can be asked at any stage during this webinar. So just please type in your questions in that right-hand panel. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Alastair. Alastair is the Business Development Manager with Overseer, or recently appointed Business Development Manager with Overseer, and Carly is the User Support within Overseer itself. So over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Stephen. So as Stephen said in the introduction, please fire questions through as we go through the presentation. And no doubt there'll be some discussion at the end as well. So really pleased to be able to have this opportunity to run through OverseerFM and the changes to the Overseer software, which we released in July, and the software changes which have been going on since then as well, and to provide some context to members of NZIPIM around what we think they need to know. So you saw on the invite the areas that we're going to cover. And hopefully we'll get all of those done over the next hour. So some key messages. OverseerFM is a significant change. It builds on the 30 years of science that have gone into the Overseer science model that sits behind the software. And really what it's focused on is how do we take Overseer back to being a decision support tool which can be used in regulation, rather than a regulatory tool which can be used for decision support. So we think a key part of doing that is putting the farmer back at the center of nutrient budget analysis, and the software helps you to do that. So for rural professionals, there's some fairly fundamental changes to the software when we compare it to the legacy product that we've all grown used to. So instead of your user account being at the center of the software, we now have the farm account. So that places the farmer at the center of their own information, and it makes it very clear that it is the farmer's information and that they have ownership and the ability to share that information. It's a shared workspace, which means we only have one version of the truth with an auditable chain of evidence, which we'll talk through later in this presentation. A key point that we do want to make through here, and it's something that we'll come back to later on, is the need to upload old legacy XML files into the new software, and we'll talk through that a wee bit later. Organizations within OverseerFM. So this is the idea that, if you're working within a consultancy, actually a group of consultants can work together to be able to see analyses and farm accounts in that shared workspace, working together to provide better outcomes for the farmer. So that's one of the ways where we've seen the old tools analytical potential was not being maximized because of the fact that we had such a clunky way of having to download XML files, email XML files, reload them back up again. And that was then leading to weak data security with no chain of evidence around what had happened within those analyses. And of course, we'll touch on this a wee bit later, but we're looking at moving to a subscription charge service for each farm account from January 2019. So by moving us back to being a decision support tool, for Overseer Limited, it's all about ensuring that our software provides the science to support sustainable food production. So we believe that Overseer, the model and the software, by supporting tailored nutrient management to improve nutrient use on farm, allows consultants and farmers to look at how to lower costs, improve production, and ensure that we get less nutrient losses into the environment. One of the key parts of that, as far as OverseerFM is then concerned, is the ability to look at trend analysis and to better understand how changes in the farming practice within the farm system are then reflected in the model and allowing you to look at comparisons over time and to track and monitor progress against goals which you might have or objectives in a farm environment plan. So, introducing OverseerFM. Easiest way to find it, if you haven't got your way there yet, is visit the overseer.org.nz website, and there's a nice blue button just down here. You can click on that, and that takes you through to the new site. Point one, I'm afraid all of those of you that have user credentials for the old software, we all need to re-register. And that's really around that idea of creating an organization or being part of an organization. And you'll notice on the registration page something which follows right the way through all of the software, that there are notification panels through it to provide information to you. We would strongly encourage that people do actually read this. We know these days we're all prone to getting to the terms of use and just clicking the box and moving on, or ignoring blue panes. We've tried to put important information in there. And in this case, particularly if you are working for a consultancy, a dairy company, a fertilizer company, or another organization, then it's important that you are invited to join that organization within OverseerFM, not that you set yourself up as an individual user, an individual organization. So just make sure you've had a chat with your manager or your other consultants that you work with around what your process is going to be for registering with the new software. So when you go through from the registration or the login page, that will take you through to your dashboard page where you can see, if you're an administrator, you can manage your own organization, you can create new farms, you can find existing farms, and you can see your favorited analyses. So one of the features of the new software is that you can go looking for, find existing farm, and you can look for any farm which is actually held within the database. If you don't currently have access, or your organization does not currently have access to that farm, then you can request access, and that request will go to the administrators and the owners of that particular farm account. Otherwise, what you've got down here is the ones that you've gone through and you've got access to, and you've maybe favorited, as you would do on many other pieces of software, to indicate that you're working on those farms and building analyses.
Alastair, I've got a question here, just in terms of, can you pass ownership of a client to another organisation?
So the farm account belongs to an owner. You can invite whoever to be the owner of that farm account. Now, our encouragement would be that the farmer is the owner. It's a fairly clear demarcation, I think. So you can look at, so if you work on the assumption that the farmer is the owner of the farm account, but for example, in this case, Taylor Ag Consulting are the administrator of this account. So we're actually gone in and set up the farm account, and we're doing the analyses. And if Stephen's the farmer and he decides actually he wants Carly's company to do some work as well, Stephen can invite Carly to become an administrator, or only to have right access to that, or I can share the access to the farm account with Carly. So there has to be an owner. If there is an owner, then only that owner can rescind the ownership and pass it on to somebody else. But certainly in terms of multiple consultancies or multiple organizations working on an account, then there's some really easy ways of doing that with permissions around farm accounts. So when we go beyond the farm account, so if we click on an individual farm account, that takes us through to the farm account overview page. And in this, we would see, if you go into the software itself, you can see the year-end analyses, the predictive analyses, and the scenario analyses split out individually. Key point to note here that for each farm account, you can only ever have one year-end. So it's important that if there are multiple consultants or multiple organizations working with a farmer on producing that year-end, then at some point someone's going to have the draw a line in the sand and say this is finished. And that might be the lead consultant, or it might be the farmer. That's entirely up to you guys as to how you define that process. We're providing a software as a service. That's a bit that we're not overly concerned around. It's more how you report that out at the other end. What it does do, though, is to provide this trend analysis that we can see at the top here, where we're at the moment looking at N-loss over years, kilograms per hectare on average for the farm. And certainly one of the things that we're encouraging people to do is to say, okay, what else would you like to see there? If we look on the right-hand side of these farm analysis, we can see we've got the N numbers, we've got the P numbers, and we've got the greenhouse gas footprint for these farms. A few people have suggested that maybe having a chart up here for the greenhouse gas footprint could be useful as well. We're open to including whatever within the software, and that's an ongoing software development conversation to be had. So when we go into a farm analysis, whether you're creating it or from scratch or going into one that you've already created, the first section that you go to is setting up your blocks. And you go, and so this is one of the key areas that we really want to emphasize some functionality around the new blocking tool. So over the 2 years that our developers have built this software, we got very strong feedback from users that having a spatial element to it would be good. And so when you go in and create your farm account, you put in an address. When you then go in to create your blocks, it takes you on Google Maps to that address and you can start drawing your blocks. A really important part of this though is that the block is only spatial in the sense that it is used to refer to the virtual climate station in order to get the climate for that particular block, and that it's also used for the size of that block, although you can then go and edit it. And it's also used for pulling through the SMAPS information in the background. So you can either be as rough as we are on this page, and so there's no need to draw to exact detail the block that you're looking to define. So in this case, we've gone through and we've drawn the 3 rough blocks of this dairy farm. We can then go in and edit the size of those blocks to make sure they fit with what's actually on the ground. And it gives a farmer an indication and a spatial representation of where his farm is and where his blocks are and where they are relative to each other. You can either take that approach, which is something that we would encourage, or you can go down the very specific spatial approach of drawing detail, and really that will probably depend on the complexity of your farm.
So Alastair, I've got another question here. Can you set farm boundaries that is fixed, but blocks can change annually as required?
So the way the software deals with information is at the analysis level. So the information that we collect actually at the farm level is very limited. So we're purely asking for account access and the details of the address and some other general detail at the farm level, because of the fact that the farm in many instances can change from year to year. So the analysis, if we take this as being the farm for a particular year, if bush block is actually a leased block, and we've got another block over here that we also leased, when we do our next year's analysis, we can actually exclude bush block entirely from it and have a different block over here. So because analyses are held because blocks are held at an analysis level, that gives you that flexibility, which particularly when we've talked to arable and horticultural growers, is what they're looking for from within the software.
So Alastair, have you considered being able to port polygons from other detailed shape files, apps such as Farm IQ?
It's usually the first question we get in any presentation or discussion. Yes, it's on our backlog. So we work for those of you that have had any exposure to software development, we use an agile development process, which is really around looking at which requests can be achieved in a time frame and for a certain cost, to develop the model to improve usability and to improve the software to improve usability. That's certainly one that is there. It's not particularly high up on the priority list at the moment, because when we've sat down and looked at what are the other things that need to go before that, it's a nice to have, not a must have. purely because when Overseer remains non-spatial. So as I say, we're only using that block representation for the climate station and to call through to SMAPs. You can define the size, you can define the soil polygons. It's something that we'll certainly look at, and it's something that we anticipate having in the future, but it's not something that's likely to be delivered in the next 18 months.
And is there a way to measure non-productive areas?
So you can put non-productive blocks in, and the model does already make allowance for non-productive areas. That might be an area that Carly could.
Yes, you can put in non-productive areas such as blocking out tree blocks and wetlands. You can also, if you've put in the full area of your farm, it will account for any areas not counted for, such as sheds and races, so that can be accounted for.
Another question here. So since you can add multiple soil and irrigation systems within a block, how does this work?
I guess that's the beauty of the software. In all of that work that we historically have had to do in terms of breaking farms down into sibling blocks and irrigation type blocks and siblings within irrigation blocks, all of that's being done in the software for you. So it allows you to present back to a farmer or to present to a regulator a picture of a farm that they actually recognize. And so when we get on to the block overview a wee bit later on, you'll see that we're actually reporting back numbers at a farm management block level, which means something to a farmer, which I think means, and we firmly believe that when we're looking at how do we drive change on farm, how do we drive changing practices on farm, that's the level of detail we need to be reporting. If we're reporting 118 blocks for a farm, and the guy normally blocks it as 20 blocks, he's going to really struggle to understand what he changes and how he changes his farm system in order to make environmental and productivity changes within his system.
So how does that compare to the old version in terms of soil types, irrigation use and such?
So all of the same calculations are being done. It's just that they're being done in the background. So it's this whole piece that if you've got so if we took home block and home block had 6 soil types, we might have to have home block A and home block B, because we needed to represent all 6 soil types within there, because each block could only have 3 soil types on there, but it can have 3 soil types and then up to 2 irrigation types. So essentially you've got 8 to 10 legacy Overseer blocks being included in a single OverseerFM management block. So block mapping is a really key part of it, and I say it's really that key bit between, you don't have to go to the absolute detail. You can be detailed if you want to, or you can work at this higher level and model the farm like that, and then adjust your areas to allow for what's actually being farmed on the ground. So another part which we think is a significant improvement, and we've had some great feedback from arable farmers so far, has been around the crop overview. So by having 2 years within the software, we're getting the previous year's crop within there and then pulling through into the reporting year, which also then means that if that's within a year end, so if this is an excerpt from your 2016 year end that we're looking at on the screen here, and you then copy your 2016 year end and make it a 2017 year end, then that will actually take the information with it and put the carrots in the year 1 and put the barley, spring barley and the peas in year 1, and you just have to populate the reporting year information. So it's greatly reducing the amount of data entry that's required for arable crops, which I say we've had some great feedback from arable farmers, including a really positive session with the Feds Arable Group.
So Alastair, this probably relates to your previous slide. So does OverseerFM accept soil series, or is it just SMAPs and soil order?
Carly, over to you.
At this point in time, soil series isn't included, so it is based on the SMAP siblings, but we've just in the last couple of weeks been able to put in advanced soil properties. So for those people, and I think someone said it was Rotorua, looking to put those advanced soil properties in, you are able to edit the siblings that SMAPs bring through to you now. So you can do that.
Cool, so going on from the cropping to have a look at the fertilizer page, and you'll notice on this one, go on.
Maybe if you go back to that previous slide. Okay, so we've got a question here. Can you copy crop rotation between blocks as you can in Legacy?
No, so you're applying the, you can apply crops to multiple blocks, but you can't copy as it was done in the old Legacy software. And that's really down to that information we need to conduct the analysis in the background. It has to be done at the block level, and also to enable it to be able to be copied forward. So yeah, unfortunately, there's some software reasons why we couldn't do that. Cool, so we'll go on to look at the fertilizer page. And this is one where with the extract from the software that we've got here, you can see a theme that runs through the whole of the OverseerFM software. So that as you go through each tab, you'll see there's a green box at the top, which gives you a summary of the inputs that you're using within that particular topic. And then you go down into the information for the individual blocks. So in this case, we've got our fertilizers applied, we've got the total applied in kgs, and then we've got the nutrients applied. When we then come down here, we can see we've got the fertilizers applied to each block. We can still see the crops that have come across from the cropping section when we look at our crop block. But an area to focus in on, which I think is going to be quite helpful to people, is this area here with total nutrients applied, and then also the maintenance nutrients report coming through. So those things used to be in different places within the old software. We've brought them through so that for pastoral blocks, they're all in the same place. So really easy one to then look at to see, okay, well, what's the maintenance nutrient requirement for this block, and what's the total nutrients applied, and you know, probably some reporting bits to go to a farmer if those numbers diverge too much. But you can very easily see in a pictorial fashion as to whether you've entered all of your fertilizer applications that you need to, and then you can look at your totals applied to make sure you've got all of your total fertilizers purchased. And the same with feeds, and the same with crops as well. So then going to the end of the software, you have the overview section, which was where all the reporting is. And this gives you the opportunity to go through and look at things like the block overview, where you can go through a visual representation of each block to make sure that you've entered all the information that you needed to. So in this case, we've got our pasture in there, we've got our animals on there, we've got our fertilizers applied, we've got some pond solids being applied, and we've got some effluent liquids being applied. And you can look at that in terms of the detail, which is coming through in this report here, or we've got these little graphics at the top here that gives you an indication. So you've got climate, you've got animals, you've got fertilizer, you've got effluent solids, you've got effluent liquid, or you've also got on this river block, we've got an irrigation pivot going on as well. And we're also then reporting the N loss and P loss at the block level within this overview report. Greenhouse gas reporting has come through in the last 4 to 6 weeks. So this is taking the outputs from the model at this stage only at the default values from the national inventory, and applying those to the farm. So the guys have literally just released into our beta test site the ability to add the farm specific information. So depending on how that beta testing goes, that should take somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks before that's then released into the production site. For those of you that have got things like the fertilizer transport, the fuel use and the electricity use that you want to add in specifically for your farm. In this case, though, what we've got is separation of the gases to make reporting a wee bit clearer. So the purpley colour is methane, the yellowy orange is nitrous oxide, and then CO2 coming through as a blue. And then below this graph, you also then have the production footprint by enterprise, which also pulls through, giving you that information, particularly for those farms who are reporting that to meat or dairy processors. Block summary is a report that we think hopefully meets the audit needs, where people are having to go through and audit overseer analyses to comply with FEP audits. So within these, it gives you the ability to go through and look at what are the parameters which have gone into creating this analysis. So we've only got the top half of this at the moment on this slide. Please jump in onto the software and take a look what else comes through when you put an analysis in. So that gives you your block details. So things like, are your block sizes consistent year to year? Your rainfall's pulling through from the virtual climate station. There's no ability to change that. Because actually, if you read the guidance notes within the legacy software and within the best practice data input standards, it did make it clear that that was supposed to be for researchers only. And so we've only built FM talking to the virtual climate station tool. We've got the soil types here, so you can look and see if soil types have mysteriously changed from one year to another year if you're doing an audit. And then you've got things like the pasture, crops and feed. Below that, there's then the fertiliser and end losses that come through.
Alastair, so can you have more than one topography for a block?
No, so each block only has one topography. But one of the things that does certainly come out from, and we'll touch on this a wee bit later, from the user survey that we conducted last month, is there's perhaps some misunderstandings around what some of the definitions mean. And if people aren't quite sure what they do mean, then I'd certainly refer people to the information on the website. And that's things like, if you have a rolling block, it does allow for things like sidelings within the modelling. So there's an assumption that there's some other areas and different topographies, and there's some very clear definitions as to how those topographies are classified within the software. But yeah, if you've got vastly different topographies, you need to have those as different management blocks.
So question we've come through. So this relates to the use of your own station data for climate.
So that, as I say, that tool was only ever designed for researchers. So that tool will be going to the Overseer Science product that we're currently got in development for researchers to use. But it's not something that we currently anticipate building for OverseerFM, really because we're looking at a tool which works from a 30-year climate station, virtual climate station network. And so it's important that we're using that information. It's more about how do we get a finer detail on that particular set of data, and also look at updating that 30-year period, which is something that we're in conversation with NIWA about at the moment.
Okay. So from a usability perspective, what is the major enhancements around this block summary that you've got on the screen at the moment?
So I guess the biggest change for this is in terms of, if you're using this as an auditing tool, then the easiest thing to compare this to is the parameter report. And for anyone that's waded through the 30 to 90 pages that tends to be a parameter report, we've pulled that key information back onto a single page to sit alongside the nutrient budget outputs to allow you to go through and do your auditing process.
So we've had topography, now geography, distance from coast. Will this be updated to be an automatic entry based on address given?
To be built, that is something that the guys are looking at the moment. It's actually a surprisingly complex piece to do because we don't know where the prevailing wind is coming from in every farm location in the country, and hence why it's at the moment it's been set as a user set distance, and that's one of the key bits, I guess. I mean, it's kind of a learner error, but it's quite worrying how often that comes through, that you see people who are in areas quite close to easterly or northerly coasts where all of the farms around them are modelled as having westerly winds. We believe the westerly wind is the predominant wind, and yet they're being modelled as being 10k from the coast rather than 110. So it's just something that, yeah, it's that nuance of the modelling, I guess, which makes that more challenging than might immediately seem the case. So going on from the block summary, and I guess helping with the auditing, but also around that security of data. is the audit log, which you can access from the front page of any analysis. So by doing that, at the moment, it's built at a very simple stage, but we will look at adding more detail into the future. So if we look at our example, Erskine Hills here, then I've been updating it back to the 19th of September, but Carly jumped in on the 19th of September in the morning and made some changes, so she's updated the analysis. So in future, that will have more detail over here where it says update analysis. So in this case, I'd have to jump on the phone or talk over the desk and have a chat with Carly to go, okay, well, what did you actually change in this analysis to get to understand? But we believe this is a great step on from having an XML file where we've got no chain of custody, chain of evidence as to what changes have taken place with that particular analysis. So talking about auditing then brings us to how we share information with councils and other organisations. So at the moment, five councils are built and ready to receive analyses from OverseerFM. And the way to do that is to publish an analysis to them. So from that first farm account page, you can see the publication button next to the farm analysis. That allows you then to select an organisation to publish to from the drop-down menu. And that then takes you to this screen. So this is from the beta site where we've got Environment Canterbury set up. I've given her a consent reference so they know what it's referring to at the other end. It's a draft because I'm having a conversation with their land management officers, and I've marked this as commercially sensitive. And then when somebody from the land management team at ECAN goes into their OverseerFM account, they will see a list of the latest publications sent to them and are able to go into that and see a read-only version of the reporting from that particular analysis. So that's a much easier way of sharing information, keeping the inputs consistent because it's a read-only version, and providing the councils with what they're asking from us for in terms of reporting. So a change that those of you who have been using OverseerFM recently may have noticed is the introduction of announcements and notifications. So this came on a couple of weeks ago, in which we will start to communicate around changes that are happening to the software and bits that have already been done. So in this case, if we zoom in, we can see there's a number of new features to the software that we've added during September. So the ability to draw more than one area of land for non-productive blocks as an example. And then there's another list of things that we're working on in October. So as I say, the guys are working on modifying the default greenhouse gas settings, showing M-pools and changing M-pools graph, and looking at how do we do some help videos, which we'll come back to a wee bit later on. So we want to be a lot more open and transparent in communicating what has changed, what is being changed, particularly when we're looking at these software changes rather than model changes. We don't anticipate doing any significant model changes for the foreseeable future because we're very conscious that there's enough change going on with the shift to this new software rather than having to worry about number changes as well. Another question that always comes up is offline data entry. So the model is online only. So you can only get a result from the model when you're online. However, if you set up a farm account and set up an analysis while you're online, you can then go in and enter data while you're offline. So obviously you won't be able to get a number returned from the science engine, but you will be able to enter that data and then come back into coverage, link to the farmer's Wi-Fi, go back to the office, whatever it might be, and run the model without having to record data in a separate place before re-entering it in. So we're trying to make the software as usable as possible and to get around some of these challenges which I know people have. So a really important piece of messaging, I think, which we touched on earlier and which I will probably overly labour at this stage because I had some very interesting conversations down in Canterbury a few weeks ago where a number of people had noticed the big yellow boxes that had appeared on the Overseer Legacy login page, but hadn't actually read the big yellow boxes. So we have put them there to be read, really to emphasise the process for phasing out the legacy software and transitioning to the new OverseerFM software.
So Alice, another question has come through. Can you enter blocks which are not contiguous?
Yeah, so if we jump back there, so one of the changes that came through last month is we can now have the ability to draw non-contiguous blocks for non-productive blocks. Sorry, so trees, houses, riparian or wetlands. The ability to do that for productive blocks is on our software backlog. It is a lot more complicated than doing it for the non-productive blocks though, so that will take a wee bit of time.
Alastair, another question here from Jeremy. We are generating nutrient reports. How do we export the summary and input pages to insert into a Word document report? Currently, we are having to screen clip the data.
So yeah, at the moment, there's two ways of doing it. One is to screen clip the data, and the other is to publish from your browser. So print from browser to a PDF or to an image. However, again, if you look at what's being worked on this month, so the following is we're actually looking at, we've had quite some really good feedback from the user survey around what reporting people need. So the guys are looking at how do we improve that reporting functionality and the ability to build PDF generation. Again, that wasn't something that we built initially because it is actually reasonably complicated. But it is something that the guys are working on at the moment and looking at how we bring that through. So I guess, you know, particularly for the risk of inundating Carly and myself with requests, if there are people that are struggling with that, it would be really good to hear what it is you need so that we actually build to your requirements rather than what we think are your requirements.
This goes back to the previous question. Please, can we have some idea how long is a while for non-contiguous productive blocks, question mark?
I can't answer that at the moment, no, because it will depend on, one of the things around an agile development process is you work on it and you see what problems come up as you try to solve it. And because you do that, you don't necessarily do the documentation to say this will be an 18-month process to do that. So it is something that we will work on. I wouldn't be holding my breath for it to take place anytime soon because it is actually quite complicated in terms of how multiple areas relate to the science engine in the background. But it's something that we're aware of and that's in the development backlog. So going back to the transition from legacy to OverseerFM. So, you know, just go through this, take the time to read these. We're very clear. So for those people that are using the standalone, which is really the fertilizer companies and Fonterra, then that standalone will cease to function from the 1st of December. The online legacy product will be available until the middle of next year. And so it's important that people have a look at, you know, how they bring analyses from legacy through into OverseerFM before that time in the middle of next year.
Okay, just another question here, and I hope I read it correctly. Are we able to change the crop end date from year to year, crop rotation, final month?
Definitely Carly questions.
This has come across my table a couple of times in the last couple of months, and it's currently sitting with Ag Research to find out what the proper answer is and what the correct answer is. So at this point in time, I don't have an answer for you, but when I know, you guys will know.
Cool. So if we're back to legacy again, so the other point to notice is OverseerFM has been built to accept XML files from Overseer version 6.2.3 or version 6.3, so the current version or the previous version. If you have baseline files, and I suspect those are the ones that will be the challenge for some people, which are in Overseer versions prior to that, they will need updating to 6.3 before you upload them into OverseerFM.
So this relates to the charging regime. So do you get charge subscription as soon as a farm is loaded or only when a year-end analysis is completed?
So no one gets charged a subscription at all till January. It's free to use till January, and in January the subscription service will click in. The subscription service will mean you'll be unable to run the model unless you have a up-to-date subscription paid for that farm account. So you will be able to create a farm account, you'll be able to enter data, you just won't be able to run the model and get an analysis result without a subscription. And so that subscription will all be through the software. There's only 4 of us full-time employees at Overseer. We're not about to employ another 30 people to chase up invoices. So it will all be done through the software, credit card payment to activate that, whether it's consultancies paying on behalf of their clients or whether it's, we would prefer it to be farmers paying their own account. But that's the way that will operate. So yeah, you can enter data, you can set up a farm account, you just can't get a result until the subscription's current.
So is there any indication of the costs of subscription at this point?
I wish there was. We're still in discussion with officials around how to spend and how to allocate the budget allocation which we received back from the government. We are hopeful that we will be in a position to release the price in November. It will be in the mid-hundreds. There have been some rather farcical scaremongering messages being put out around the country, which I think is really sad, that it will be a lot higher than that. It will be in the mid-hundreds. We hope that we'll be able to share that in November, and subscriptions will start from January.
Okay, well, it's just another question here. Can you please explain how to access offline function?
I say if you're logged in, so log into your, if you've got a current session of OverseerFM, so you've been logged in online and you've got that farm account cached in your computer's memory, then that will work while you're offline. So it's simply a case of making sure that you've got the farm account active in your browser before you go offline. You can then go offline, you can add information to it, you just can't get a result from the model until you come back online again.
So what about old files that may not necessarily relate to a farm, but might be held in a Massey related course as part of someone's project work?
Okay, so we're actually working with the universities at the moment to build an Overseer education tool, which will be the one that's used for the Massey courses. So that will be a separate piece of software, because we're really working on the premise that OverseerFM will only contain real farms. We fully understand that some modelers do some what-if scenarios, if you like. So I guess some fictitious farms or some imaginary farms to look at, what might it happen in a relatively simple farming system to put a feed pad in, to take a feed pad out, whatever that might be. We're comfortable that that sort of work takes place within FM. It would just mean that a valid subscription would need to be set up for that farm account. So someone's going to have to pay for that subscription. And that those imaginary farms will get swamped by the number of analyses that exist from real farms. It's really up to individual users what they load up into OverseerFM. I say it's just really relevant to the fact then that whatever farm account is being utilized, then that will need to have a valid subscription.
So the latest date in terms of uploading legacy files into OverseerFM?
You can take as much time as you like, and that's that's forever. There's no anticipation to switch off the ability to upload XMLs. My word of caution would be, if it's after the middle of next year, you won't have a legacy product to go back to make sure that any errors in it can be corrected. So certainly if I was in my previous role running the farm sustainability team at Balance, I would be ensuring that all of our files had been updated and uploaded into the new software by the end of June.
So we've got another question, goes back to subscription again. So if a farmer has multiple farms, is it just one charge or multiple charges per farm?
Was that asked by Landcorp, or was that actually from a no? I'm afraid it's one farm account per farm. So in the case of multiple farm owners, they will need to have multiple farm accounts. And that's actually something which we've been and talked to most of the multi-farm owners now. I think we've covered, I would say, probably 80% of those farms which own 15 or more farms. And whilst I wouldn't say they're delighted at the thought of having another bill to pay, they can understand the reasons for it, and they can see the benefits from it in terms of them having visibility and ownership of their data.
So we've got a question from Warren. How is forestry on farm treated? Separate blocks by forest type / systems?
So that's actually at a fairly rudimentary level at the moment in terms of, so you can look at, and again, so you can use your non-contiguous blocks now for forestry, but the only separation in there at the moment is between exotics and natives. We've actually held a workshop with Scion and some other scientists interested in that area, and that's something that's currently sitting in our science backlog for development into the future in terms of how do we look at new, because there are some default values. 3 kilos of N is the one that's always chucked out there for those forestry blocks. We're going to do some work looking at, what are the outputs from different forest types, and also particularly then looking at the carbon sequestration of different forests and different harvesting methods.
So will the training version be available to all users to experiment as part of the learning process?
So there will be the Overseer education tool there as part of the Massey courses. The training version isn't something that's been suggested before, so I guess that's something we could take offline and take a look at. But I think one thing we'll come on to in a minute is what we are going to do is provide a lot more support around the use of the model, alongside the fact that, from the feedback that we've had so far, that the software itself is a lot more usable and a lot more understandable, a lot more intuitive, and also a lot more communicative. So, I mean, we've all seen those wonderful error messages in the legacy software that say, you have an error, and then you've got to go and try and find it. Whereas the new software is very specific around providing advice as to why it's not giving you a result, and where you need to look to make some changes. So we'll maybe touch on that in a few moments when we look at the greater support that Carly's the top of the triangle, if you like, when it comes to that support. But there's some other things that we're building around that as well. Cool. And I guess that kind of leads nicely on to, change is a constant. We've come from, the horrible old DOS version of Overseer. We've come through the legacy product, and we're now looking at something which is a lot more usable and modern. And I'm afraid it's, change is a constant. There's more to come. It's going to keep changing. And really what we want to get to is to get away from, the last 18 months has really been around bug fixes and fixing errors in the modeling, as well as building this new software. What we want to get to a point now with is actually to be able to leapfrog from here to help people to use it as a tool for innovation. So the way that the software is being used in terms of, just producing numbers for regional plans and just getting the numbers churned through and getting as many nutrient budgets done as possible, it really seems to have led to some misunderstandings about how the model can help us with driving innovation on farm and helping farmers to make better decisions using the science that the New Zealand science community has built for us.
So just on that, how do you see OverseerFM integrating with other tools on the market, such as FarmMax?
Yep. So I guess, I think that's going to be on a case-by-case basis. We've already started conversations with a number of software providers around how to push information from their software into OverseerFM, and also how to suck information from OverseerFM into their software. And that's something that will develop over the next 6 to 12 months. I guess a word of caution, and these things are never as easy as us non-IT people think they should be. And so what we will probably look at is getting a couple of the well-used platforms supported in the first instance, and then look at how we roll things out from there. Having said that, we've got a draft API for taking information out of the software already available if people want it to talk to their system. Quite happy for people to have that API and to be able to look at what that information looks like and how it might fit with their systems. So going from changing the model and changing the software, there's also a lot of changes around the team and the how we process and how we work. You know, just by the fact that you've got myself and Carly here today, obviously most people have seen, you know, Caroline's been the face of Overseer for the last couple of years. Now she's built a team around her in terms of ourselves and the product development guys. And so we've got that resource, and we've actually now got an integrated model development team, which includes the software developers at Overseer, the ag research team, and the Reseer team that have always worked on the software. So it's actually an integrated team led by Overseer Limited now, which gives us much greater visibility as to what stage science projects and the modeling development is at. We've got a science prioritization process which is in development, which is actually going to our board this week, so we'll be able to talk about that a wee bit later on. I've already touched on the Overseer Science and Overseer Ed software. Overseer Science particularly designed for the science community to meet their needs. So their needs are very different from those of us that are doing farm modeling, and the old legacy software had to meet their needs and our needs for farm modeling. This way we can have two different sets of software, which allows them to do things like, you know, comparing model outputs to lysimeter results, to run mass data sets against the model and see what drops out of it. All of that fun stuff which the scientists like to do, that's what that software is built to do. We're working with you know, how do we engage with stakeholders and what does that look like? We've been conducting bi-monthly workshops with regional council staff, so that's included people from their land management teams, from their compliance teams, and from their IT teams to make sure that we're actually giving them the information they need and able to pass information back and forth from the software. And we're looking at, you know, getting greater engagement with users. So a few of you, or some of you, will have responded to the user survey that we sent out last month, and thank you very much for doing that. We had just under 200 responses, of which 42% were from consultants and 15% was from farmers, which was really cool to see as well. And from that, it was great because it was good to see that 67% of you would recommend Overseer to a colleague. And from the free text that came through from those surveys, it showed us some areas of software prioritization that we need to work on. But as I touched on before, it also revealed some areas where there's maybe some misunderstandings around how the software works, how the model works, or how different things should be done. So we're going to try and pick that up in our help processes. And to provide help, we've got user guides on the website. We're going to build some frequently asked questions, which some of those modeling misunderstandings might fit well in. We've got in-website links, so you can click on help actually within the OverseerFM software. And we've also just started last week building a series of help videos. We're getting feedback from people who've used other software as a service providers that's a way that people like to learn. And so we're just starting to create and upload to our YouTube channel those videos, and so they'll be coming out over the next few months, and we'll provide links in our newsletter and also on Twitter and on LinkedIn and from our overseer.org.nz website. So
okay, so just questions are rolling in, which is great. So when will the new version be coming out, Overseer FM?
So Overseer FM, the new software, is live now. It was released in July. If the question is referring to when will the next science engine change be, there will not be one for the foreseeable future. It's likely that we will retire the legacy software before we make any substantive changes to the model. And so, you know, people can rest assured for now that OverseerFM is there. We might do some minor model changes in April, May, the way we normally do, but that will really depend on what science is ready to be incorporated in the model by then.
It's a question about, you talked a bit earlier about data being swamped, which might possibly lead to slowness in the system. Do you have any reasons for that? Is it multiple users possibly, or is it just maybe the capacity or bandwidth at this point in time?
No, there shouldn't be any problems with that, because we've followed the government's advice and used their preferred server provider, and those servers are all within Australasia, so there certainly shouldn't be a challenge with accessing the software. If people do have any challenges, then please let us know. Because yeah, as far as we're aware, we think we've built it to vastly exceed the likely numbers that we expect to see on the site.
Okay, so this goes back to the subscription model again.
Yep.
When we talk farms, we sort of think larger scale, but what about horticulture and orchards, which might be 10, 20 hectares? And if the orchard owner has multiple properties, once again, will they be required to pay a fee per orchard, or will different arrangements maybe apply based on the scale of the farming operation?
So I mean, in a case like that, they could have multiple blocks. They can be non-contiguous. That's one of the beauties of the ability to draw them onto the Google Maps that we had at the blocking with the blocking tool. So you can draw those block orchards on as individual blocks. It's really around modeling the farming operation. So if those orchards are part of a single farming operation, then yeah, absolutely model 5, 10, 15, 20 orchards within that one. If, however, they are operating as separate farm operations that you would need to report on or understand or look at making changes within that system, then that's something where you need to look at having those multiple accounts. So we've got some definitions within the user guide of what a farm account should be, we think. But we're not being strict on that. I guess the piece is really there around, what do you practically want to use the information for? So if you're trying to combine, 4 or 5 farms together and still be able to make support decisions using the software, you may struggle with that. Equally, I know there's one corporate that we've done some work with down south who regularly does combine a couple of farms together because that's how they run them. And they actually move the mobs around those farms differently year to year. So in that case, it's perfectly reasonable to model those 2 farms as one farm account within the software. But their other farms are all modeled individually because that's the way they're operated. So it's really at what level do you want to be able to make decisions about the property, and/or at what level do you need to report to somebody else, whether that be a dairy company, whether that be a meat company, or whether that be a regional council.
So do you see, or is there plans as a mobile app potentially?
I think that might be a wee bit of a struggle. I think we might need a reasonably big screen to be able to look at all of the parameters. However, it is something, there's some work that the guys are looking at in their development backlog around changing the way the software behaves if you do look at it on a different screen. So the software is anamorphic. It will move around depending on what screen you're looking at it on. And the guys are just looking at some software tools that maybe can reduce some of the clutter if you do that. So probably a mobile app not high on our list of priorities, but certainly making it so that you could, even if you just wanted to, maybe present results back on a phone, I can see there might be a place for something like that, and making that easier to do within the software, then that's something that we're certainly going to look at.
So the YouTube clips there, are they live at the moment? Are they all workable?
Work in progress at the moment. We're just working through the fine tuning of those 4 that are up there as a starter, and then we will just release those as and when we get them completed. We started recording those last week. For anyone who hasn't tried to record a software demonstration guide, I thought it wouldn't take that long. It takes about 1.5 hours to 2 hours per video. So even if they're only 2 minutes long, or maybe that's just me, but we'll work our way through them. And certainly if people find pain points in the software, please let us know what they are, in order that we can then do a video on that maybe earlier than we might otherwise do it, so that we can avoid other people having the same challenge.
Okay, so is there any difference in the model, I assume the current Overseer model towards the OverseerFM model, between year-end predictive and scenario nutrient budgets?
So the biggest difference is around the year ends, and that fact that for each farm account can only ever have 1 year end for an individual year. At the moment, the way the software is built, there is absolutely no difference between a predictive and a scenario. However, there's a very distinct reason why we've kept the 2 analysis types in there. So when the Overseer tool was first built back in the 1980s, there was a true scenario tool built as part of it, which enabled you to go in and select a single parameter. So I want to add a wintering barn, I want to add a feed pad, I want to double my effluent area. Click on those examples, and then the scenario would run through and change your whole model analysis for you. So that hasn't been there since the 80s. And it's something that the guys are going to start working on probably middle of next year, once we've got FM fully up and going, and we've got the science excuse me, we've got the science product available to the scientists, the educational product available to the universities, because that will then enable people to look at that and avoid this whole thing that, if you put a feed pad in, then you've got to bring your feed in, you've maybe got to change your animal numbers, you then got to look at your pasture production, maybe look at your cropping information, look at where your irrigation's going. So one change leads to a whole load of trickle-down effects within the model, whereas a true scenario tool will do all of that for you. So long-term, that's what we want to build, and that's why we've kept the different scenarios there.
So how far away is the inefficiency output?
I think it's in already, isn't it?
Yes,
I think it went in last month, so it's one of the things that got added last month. So back to our key messages, I guess, we're very conscious that OverseerFM is a significant change for people. I guess to that last point though, you should be reassured that the science behind it is still the same. It's just as robust and useful, I think, was the key word that came out of the useful user survey, which is good. Inputs and outputs are much more user friendly, and we're getting that feedback from consultants and from farmers and from the regulators. It puts the farmer back at the center of nutrient budget analysis. So hopefully it enables you to have that conversation with the farmer, get them to log in, have the analysis in front of them as well, and actually have that as a conversation rather than something that's done to a farmer and which they don't feel a part of. And all of that, we think, will drag out, or push Overseer back to being a decision support tool to support change on farm and to support environmental improvement that we all know needs to happen, and for us to be able to demonstrate what that change has been and what it is going forward. And very much emphasize, I guess, the fact that, it's with Overseer Limited now, there is a team of us here to support you in your use of our software. Please, if you get issues, don't shout into the wind, don't shout into the sky, actually just come and talk, email Carly at the help desk at overseer.org.nz, get in touch with myself, ask the questions. We will help you around the software or around the modeling to get the most out of it.
Well, that brings an end to our webinar. A special thank you to Alastair and Carly for a very informative presentation. Also, a great range of questions coming through from our audience as well. This webinar will be made available in the member-only section of our website by tomorrow afternoon. That brings an end to this presentation. I am Steve McCauley, and thank you for joining us today.